We are in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting with verses 1 and 2. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. And now chapter 12, verses 8 through 14. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd. My son, beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, as all has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment, with every secret thing, whether good or evil. This is the word of the Lord.
Well, it's really good to be back with you all this morning. As Amanda mentioned, today we are entering into a new series, Ecclesiastes. And to give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes peek at how we think through the preaching calendar, in addition to a lot of prayer that goes into what are we going to preach on this year, a pattern we think through it's two lenses. One is generally throughout the year we try to cover an Old Testament book, a New Testament book, and then a topical series. How do the scriptures speak to a particular topic, right? So we just went through that series, Credo, looking at core beliefs of the Christian faith. That was a topical series. So we rotate through those three categories. And also we look at the genres within the library of Scripture, so historical narrative and letters and poetry. And Ecclesiastes as a wisdom book in the Old Testament fits a gap that we need to fill. And we find through that by keeping these things in line, we help give our people a well-rounded diet of Scripture, especially as we consider a lot of people are only here for a few years and then they're gone off to a new area. And so it's just a little bit of sometimes we'll be like, how do you just throw stuff at a dartboard? And not really. And so we are in Ecclesiastes. And if you've read the book before, you may remember your experience reading it for the first time, where you jump in, you're like, okay, I'm in the Bible, right? And you come across, like right off the bat in chapter 1, verse 2, vanity of vanities, or if you have the NIV, that translates meaningless. Meaningless, meaningless. All is meaningless. And then you get to a place like chapter 4, verse 2, where it says, and I thought about it, and it seemed like those who are dead are better off than those who are living. And in fact, better than both, the living or the dead, are people who've never been born at all, because then they've never experienced how awful life is. And you're like, what in the world is this doing in the Bible? And one of the things that's refreshing, actually, about Ecclesiastes is God, through this author, gives voice to how life often is. And as those loved by Jesus, we don't want to be shallow people who skim the surface of life and aren't willing to look at how perplexing or painful life can be. And along with that, Ecclesiastes is one of the most surprisingly happy books in the Bible, where it teaches us how to walk in wisdom and to enjoy life as a gift. And so in a moment where wisdom is in scarcity, and many of us are tempted to approach life through the lens of not enjoyment and hope, Ecclesiastes has a lot to offer us. So I'm looking forward to walking through this book with you, and I'll be learning, as we go. And so today it might feel a little bit more classroomy than sermony. So today's going to be an intro sermon to get our hands around this book, because this book defies tidy analysis. And it often takes hard turns that leave you wondering, okay, what's the author doing? There's seemingly contradictory statements. And so today's just going to be giving us some handholds that I hope will help you as you read the book on your own, and then as we go through the book together. Okay, so let's start with a good question, which is, who wrote this wild book? And something important to note about Ecclesiastes is there are two voices in the book. And so you have the first voice is a compiler who appears at the bookends, the beginning and the end. So chapter 1 through 11 actually is he's saying the words of the preacher, and then he summarizes what the preacher says, and then at the end, the compiler comes back in and summarizes what the preacher has said. And so it's a little bit like if you've seen The Princess Bride, and at the beginning of The Princess Bride, you have that grandfather who looks at his grandson and says, hey, let's read this book together. And then he jumps into the story, and then you're in the story for most of the film, and then it ends with the granddad giving some final concluding thoughts on the story. That's a lot like Ecclesiastes. So you have the first voice, who's the compiler, but then the bulk of the book, right, from chapter 1, verse 12 until almost the end of chapter 12, is the main voice, who is identified as Kohelet, which literally translates as preacher or teacher or presider over an assembly. And many people have identified this figure as Solomon, which is a perfectly fine approach to take. At the same time, it's important to note that the author's name is never given in the book, and there's equal evidence. This can be a conversation for a different time or day, but there's equal evidence in the book to indicate that the author isn't Solomon, but is in fact a literary persona created by an anonymous Israelite sage. And so either view is valid. Okay, there are lots of very godly, smart people who fall on both sides of this. It's not a hill to die on. What the exciting thing is the author, right, inspired by the Holy Spirit, at least invites us to view life through a Solomon-like figure, right? Because if anybody is qualified to speak to the meaning of life after experiencing everything that there is to experience, and through the lens of one of the most powerful and wise kings in history, it's this guy, right? Solomon, or a person very much like Solomon. And so since Kohelet, or the teacher, is the title, that's the one given to us in the book, that's what we'll be using throughout this series. So I'll use a phrase like the author, or Kohelet, or the teacher. That's just that's the framework we'll be using, because that's what's given to us in the book. Okay, so that's first, the author, right? Two voices, the compiler, and then this main teacher in the middle, who tends to oscillate between despair and delight, Kohelet. Okay, so that's the author. Next, let's look at one of the most common phrases that Kohelet uses throughout Ecclesiastes to describe life, and it's this word hevel. It's used 38 times in the book, and it's usually translated as vanity, like we see here in chapter 1, verse 2, or meaningless if you use the NIV. And so this word hevel, it's admittedly it's a really hard word to translate. At the same time, if you only understand it to mean meaningless or vanity, which pointless, then what ends up happening is you reduce Kohelet to this like recluse of an Edgar Allan Poe scholar who's despairing of life, which isn't how we're meant to read the book. So the word hevel, it literally translates as breath or wisp of smoke. So think about walking outside on a frigid day and you go, and you see that wisp of smoke that comes out. And it's a really helpful image. And there are two aspects of this image that Kohelet is drawing on to describe life. And the first is brevity, right? You breathe out and it's there and then it's gone as quickly as it appears. So the word can mean fleeting or brevity. The second sense of the word is enigma or hard to grasp. You think about a breath of smoke, it's there, it's a thing, but you try to grab it and you can't quite get a hold of it. And the way that you know which sense of the word the author is using throughout Ecclesiastes is, because he's almost always using one of those two senses, is, like any good interpretation, is context. So for example, chapter 11, verse 10, he says, "For youth and the dawn of life are vanity." He's not saying to be young, to be youthful is meaningless. He's saying it's fleeting, right? It's like, your young years go by faster than the blink of an eye. It's fleeting, and we can tell that by context. The other sense, like enigma, hard to grasp, take for example chapter 8, verse 14, there is a vanity, a hevel, that takes place on earth, that there are righteous people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the wicked, and there are wicked people to whom it happens according to the deeds of the righteous. I said that this is also vanity or hevel. So here he's saying, okay, justice is a thing. It's a real thing. But when I look at the world, it seems hard to grasp because I see really good people who have horrible things happen to them. And then I see evil people who seem to just live happy lives and die with a smile on their face. Hevel. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And it's this second sense of hard to grasp, hard to understand, perplexing, painful, that's used most often in Ecclesiastes. So somebody works decades to skillfully build a business, and then the person they pass it on to blows it up in a week. Hevel. Right? Or why is it that when I experience every pleasure under the sun, or I can have like a really good year, I still feel unsatisfied? Hevel. Why, if I've been a really good leader, are there so many people who don't appreciate me or misinterpret me? Hevel. And by using the second sense, like hard to grasp, what I love about Ecclesiastes is God helps give voice to the fact that so much of life doesn't work out how we'd expect. So much of life doesn't seem to have a resolution. It's hard to get our hands around. Hevel. Okay, so as you're reading the book, anytime you see vanity, meaningless, just think that, okay, context, is he saying brief, or is he saying, okay, it's hard to grasp, hard to figure out, maybe a little bit of a paradox here. Okay? So author, Kohelet, Hevel, really helpful as we read this book. Number 3, the framework that I've found most helpful comes from a commentary by Bobby Jamieson on how to read Ecclesiastes, especially when it seems like there's contradictory statements throughout the book, is to understand Ecclesiastes as a view or a journey through a 3-level building. So at any given moment, Kohelet is looking at the world and making observations from one of 3 stories in a building. And so on the ground level, which was where we enter, and that's where we spend most of the book, he's surveying life purely through a human perspective. So just observation, or for you philosophers in the room, empiricism, okay, things you can discern just through observation, reflection, touching, seeing. And it's through this ground level that he surveys things like work and power and justice and sex and money, and pronounces them hevel, either fleeting or hard to get my hands around. They don't always work out the way I expect them to. And everything that he observes on the ground level is anything anyone can observe who's willing to look hard enough and look honest enough. And it's on this ground level where Kohelet often appears the most depressed and in despair. We're just like, work, hevel, pleasure, hevel, relationships, hevel. All right, so this is all ground level view, right, without any reference to God. Occasionally, he goes 7 times, to be precise, he goes up to the second level. And here it's fascinating because he looks at the same landscape, work, sex, power, money, leadership, and so forth, and instead of pronouncing them hevel, he pronounces them good. He pronounces them as gifts. So he'll say things like in one place, ground level, he'll say like, work is pointless for ABC reasons. And then another place he'll say, there's nothing better to find enjoyment in whatever work you have to do in front of you. Or he'll say, it is so sweet for the eyes to see the sun, right? You should enjoy your spouse or food and drink. So this is the second level. And then even fewer than his phrase on the second floor, he shoots up to the third story. He rarely stays here for long, and he goes here without warning. And he just goes up long enough to point out 2 key reference points. And it's one is to fear God, which means to stand in reverent awe of him and to center your life around him. And 2, because God will bring you and all people and everything that happens into judgment. And we'll get into that more later. And it's these reference points from the third story, hopefully we're tracking, that account for the difference between the vantage point from the first story and the second story, right? His first story is pronouncing everything that he sees as hevel, but suddenly second story pronounces them as good and as gifts. And that's because on the second floor, he's bringing what he learned on the third floor. He's bringing God to bear on the second story, i.e., if all of life is created by and sustained by God, then to say life is a gift, it's not mere sentiment or wishful thinking, but it is the strict and sober truth that anything good you experience, from the mundane to the breathtaking, it's not just accident or happenstance or even something you were owed or gained. It was given to you by a glad and generous God who wants you to enjoy him and to enjoy other people and life as gifts. And we need to keep both of these perspectives in mind, as Kohelet does. Put another way, viewing life from the ground floor is like viewing the world, and you may know if you're this type of person or you know people like this. It's ground level is mainly viewing the world through the lens of Genesis 3 and 4. Right? Due to our insistence on being God and not letting God be God, we've plunged ourselves, the world, and relationships into misery. Second level is viewing the world through the lens of Genesis 1 and 2. That you and other people in the world are created by a glad and generous God. And we need to keep these two things together. They run like parallel tracks. They don't cancel out the other. So life is hevel and a gift. Life is futile and worthwhile. Life is filled with searing pain and unimaginable joy and beauty. And to collapse one into the other is not only to distort Kohelet's message, but it's to live like a fool. So many times we don't react to people and to life thoughtfully and well because we're running on one of these tracks while neglecting the other. And we'll give more examples of how that can look. So we always need to keep these things together, right? Hevel and gift. Okay, so 3-level building, just hope. So as you're reading, you can think through, okay, is he looking at the world through ground level, second level, or third level as I'm reading? And that'll guide much of our reading. Which leads to number 4, right? Why is Ecclesiastes written? What's the point of Ecclesiastes? We've already alluded to it a number of times. And first, Ecclesiastes is written to make us wise. Ecclesiastes it's in the wisdom genre within the library of Scripture, and Ecclesiastes is in dialogue with Proverbs. And if you read Proverbs describes how life tends to work. So you read Proverbs and you see things like train up a child in the way he should go, and when he grows older, he won't depart from it. Proverbs 22, okay, or Proverbs 13, disaster pursues sinners, and the righteous have good things happen to them. Right? So in other words, generally speaking, if you're a parent who is a parent of character and you create a good home, right, where you teach your child to be a person of character and follow Jesus, will that child grow up to know they're loved by Jesus, follow him, and be a person of character? Yes. Generally speaking, that's how life works. Generally speaking, right, disaster pursues the sinner. Generally speaking, if you live a life of deceit and gossip and everything's about you, self-centeredness all the time, does disaster tend to follow you? Yes. Generally speaking, if you live a life of godliness and of character, do good things happen? Yes, because you're running along the grain of reality. That's Proverbs. Ecclesiastes comes along, and it's not in contradiction, but it's a different emphasis. Ecclesiastes comes along and says, yes, that's generally how life works, but not always. Sometimes you can be an amazing godly parent, and your child grows up to either reject God altogether or to just not be a person of character. You may live a horrible, evil life and have many, or you know other people who do, and just so many good things happen to you. And what's helpful about this is Ecclesiastes helps us to see and name reality clearly, which we need to be wise. And much of reality is a mess. Right? Either it doesn't make sense or it doesn't happen the way it should go. And so many of us, we don't act wisely because we're over-affected or surprised when life doesn't go as it should. I mean, how many parents maybe do you know who never recover from a child going off the rails because it was so outside of their conceptual scheme of what could happen? Okay, or how many of us are over-affected by politics or current events or things in the church or things in your relationships with people or just how your life plan is working out or not working out. And when we're so thrown onto our backs, what this reveals is, okay, we had this entitlement maybe, or just this expectation that if ABC, then DEF. And when it doesn't happen as it should, we're too caught off our guard. And so Ecclesiastes, it helps us to name reality for what it is. It's often hevel, not so that we become cynics or live in depression, but so that we can live and love well and aren't overly shocked when these hevel things happen. Okay, so Ecclesiastes is written to help make us wise, to see life for what it is so that we can love well. And two, it is written so that we can enjoy life. Ecclesiastes, especially over the past year for me, I think maybe more than any other biblical book, has helped me enjoy life for what it is. Ecclesiastes is awesome because on the one hand, it gives voice to, yes, there is pain or just horrific things that you will either see or experience that are unreal. And it will make you wonder, where is God in all this? Clearly the God of the Bible couldn't even exist at all if I've experienced what I've experienced. It gives honesty to that in a way that many of us aren't brave enough to do. And at the same time, it forces us to ask the question, what is deeper and more permanent? Pain and evil and injustice, or goodness and beauty and joy? And the answer is the latter, because God is deeper and more permanent than anything evil or perplexing that we see in this world. And this is what God, through Jesus, gives us. By uniting himself to us and us to him, he allows us to tap into this substructure of reality, and while not ignoring the pain of life, to enjoy life for what it is. There is an urgency in Ecclesiastes that says, life is so fleeting. It is so fleeting. So are you going to spend your youth? Are you going to spend your time with friends and family just being self-absorbed or being the cynic and focusing on everything bad that's happening in the news? Or can you be someone who can enjoy the person or the thing in front of you? Enjoy that deep belly laugh you're experiencing with a friend or with a good show for the gift that it is, a gift from a glad, good, and generous God. Enjoy. What was it, a week or two ago during setup, a bunch of people were like fantasizing about how much they love Taco Bell. If mystery meat from Taco Bell is your thing, enjoy it for what it is, I guess, a gift from a glad and generous God. Right? Right, any good thing you experience, if you have the eyes to see, we get to enjoy. And through those things, as we'll see, we get to enjoy God himself. And so, as we ramp off here of this introduction, let's look at some concluding applications. And the first is, I'd encourage you to read Ecclesiastes this week. On average, it takes about 30 minutes to read. Just read through it and do a couple things. One is on a more intellectual front. You can apply some of these tools that we've talked about. So read it, and now anytime you see the word vanity or meaningless, ask, okay, is he using it in the sense of brief or fleeting, or is he using it in the sense of like enigma, hard to wrap my head around? Or you can ask questions like, okay, is he speaking through ground level, second level, third level here? So on an intellectual front, this can be really helpful. And on a more relational front with God, which is the main way I encourage you to read the book, I'd encourage you to try these two things. Read through the book and probably do this more slowly. and look at the places where he's on ground level and just acknowledging something really confusing, hard to figure out, or painful, and be willing to ask God something that's really hard for you right now. Like, God, this doesn't make sense to me. It could be something you're seeing, something that you're experiencing. And because what you'll notice in Ecclesiastes is there's not a lot of resolution in the book, and this is intentional because life doesn't have a lot of resolution. And what God gives us in Ecclesiastes isn't like that social media quote that makes everything nice and tidy for you, but what God gives you is solidarity. Where he says, here, I'll help you name or put words to something that maybe you're having a hard time naming or putting words to. And I'm big enough to handle any of your accusations or your questions. And you know that he's large enough to receive your full range of emotions and questions, because the same God who Kohelet sees on the third level, the same God who brings all things into judgment, is the same God who in Jesus enters into the hevel of this world and subjects himself to it. We talked about bad things happening to good people. Is there any more quintessential example of that than Jesus, who in love for you allows the worst injustice that's ever happened to happen to him, so that, right, through his power and joy, he can overcome the hevel of this world and unite himself to you so that you can live with wisdom and joy. And as you ask him these questions, or just tell God honestly what you're wrestling with, he's big enough and caring enough to sit with you in it. That's the first relational thing I encourage you to do as you read Ecclesiastes. Second, and that's in the line of wisdom, okay? And then second, in the line of enjoyment, just read through the book and look at some of the enjoyment passage where he talks about enjoying life and food and people and things as a gift, and ask, God, where are you inviting me into enjoyment? Because Ecclesiastes is encouraging you into more laughter, more inviting friends over for dessert, right? More getting caught up in a mesmerizing song and appreciating it for what it is, a gift of God. And for the people in your life, like, what are they going to benefit more by? Which version of you, a cynical you or a joy-filled you? I think about just yesterday. So yesterday, start of Sabbath, I go to do incline walking on a treadmill that's in like the community center gym right by our house. And I do it for a number of reasons, but one is just to like center myself and do some prayer before the day, before I'm like really in it with the kids. And so I go over there, and it's not the most comfortable thing in the world. Like I'm breathing hard, and I'm about halfway in, and just getting ready for the day. And parents, like some of these quiet moments you have before getting in it are just sacred almost. And so I'm in it, and then the door bangs open behind me, and two of my children come running in because Kelsey gave them the key to the community center. So they just start bouncing off the walls like footballs in this gym. And can I just be myself here? My first thought is like, my whole day's ruined, right? Like, I can't be centered anymore. My prayer life's ruined. Like, I'm just going to be a mean parent for the rest of the day because I didn't get my mean time. And then so I almost said, hey kids, can you go home? Just give Dad 20 more minutes. I'll be home in 20 minutes, and then I'm all yours. And then I was like, if you've learned anything from Ecclesiastes, Steve, are they interrupting the life you're trying to enjoy, or is this the life that God has given you to enjoy? And so I said, hey kids, there's this song that we play. It's a song that just screams sunny, carefree Friday or sunny, carefree Saturday. It's a special song for us. And I was like, how about if I play that song and we can dance as I'm like, on this treadmill, because I'm not gonna stop walking. And they're like, yeah. So I put it on, and I'm like trying to, dance on the treadmill as I'm out of. And if you look through the window, you would have seen the kids just dancing and smiling, and then this very uncoordinated father doing who knows what on the treadmill. And I'll just tell you guys, like, for these kids, and I often don't respond this way, but in this moment I did. And There were two versions of their dad they could have gotten in that moment. And which version of their dad is going to help them grow up to be more kind and resilient and joy-filled children who know that their Father in heaven is good? And so it is for you. Like the people in your life, they need somebody who, A, sits with God on a personal level with the really hard questions they're honestly wrestling with. They need a person like that. And they need a person who's willing to dance out of breath on a treadmill when maybe they'd rather be alone at first. Let's pray.